are. So this is awesome to see the fruition. I hear this is a series that has been going really well. They do this, monthly? So yeah, be coming to more events in the future. I'm not sure exactly what they all talk about, but today we're talking about the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which, for this audience, I call that the big garden, if you will, the biggest garden in the state. And so just out of curiosity, who knows about the Florida Wildlife Corridor? I'm not going to do a poll or anything, but just out of, okay, about half or so. Yeah, you do, Maria and Casey, that's awesome. They work for us, so they should know. If you see a star, that's story time. I want to tell a story. Don't let me move forward without stopping for the story. And if you see the question mark, I want to ask you a question. And that's because I'll just get talking and I'll forget half the things I want to say, and then I get back and I say, I forgot to tell that story that would have, changed the world, but I forgot, so next time. The Florida Wildlife Corridor is that map and everything you see in green. All right, sweet, I got a laser. And we're about right there at the red dot. I kind of used my discretion, but that greenery is the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And what's cool about this vision, because all that's intended to be conservation land, is that it's connected. It's physically, literally on the ground connected. The only thing really severing the corridor are roads, which we do have a solution for that too. But I want to ask y'all, and I want to hear a couple answers. Why is connection important in the vision of the corridor, in the vision of conservation? What's important about the physical connection of land? Oh. So life can move freely. Wildlife can move freely, yes. Yes. Anything else? Any other reasons? Really important thing here. Uh-oh. Is it working? Anything, really important thing here in Florida is water. Water can move freely as well. So what you see about a lot of these connections of the land are they're literally riverbeds and lake systems and wetlands. It's also, because we're at a garden, plant migration. Plants pollinate up and down corridors as well. It's just as important for plants' resilience in botany as it is for wildlife. But yes, you nailed it. What was your name that said wildlife? Sierra? Okay, you basically hit the head on the nail. The biggest reason, and the biggest reason people know about it, is for large megafauna, big animals, to be able to migrate up and down the state. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why that's important. But what's cool is this vision is almost half the state of Florida, so it's very ambitious. It's all around us. As you see right here in Orlando, you're surrounded by the corridor in different areas. You're probably familiar with a lot of the places that are in the corridor. And, a lot of people see a big plan like this on paper, and they're like, that's great, that's ambitious, that's like, humans going to Mars. Like, that's cool on paper, but what's the actual getting it done look like? And what's so cool about this story in the corridor is that we're over halfway done. 10 million acres are already protected. So this is not something that's just pie in the sky. It's actually getting done year after year. And we've been doing a great job protecting the state for a very long time. So, down in the south, you see that's the Everglades, that big chunk at the bottom of the state. Right here is Ocala National Forest, Apalachicola. So there's these big kind of hubs or living rooms in the corridor, and we're building the hallways now. So it's a mix of public land. A lot of these are state parks, national parks, city parks even, if they have connection. And a lot of it's private land, and we're going to get into that. So the cool thing about this story is it's actually happening. So what does the corridor actually look like? I know a lot of y'all here in Florida, we love our beaches, we love our theme parks. But when our 150-odd million visitors come to the state, they think that's all Florida has to offer. And I tell people, loving Florida for its beaches is kind of like loving Colorado or loving a picture for the frame. The frame can be gorgeous. The frame can be a great addition to the picture, but the interior is where the vast majority of the story is. It's like going to Colorado and saying, I love the border of Colorado. It's just fantastic. That line between Kansas and Colorado or Wyoming, and it is gorgeous. But there's so much inside as well that people don't always consider. And these are some of the things that you see in the interior of the state. And these are all photos from the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Holds our springs. There are a lot of beaches inside the corridor. I love our beaches and I love our theme parks. I have little kids, so we go to Disney. But people need to realize there's so much else outside of that can really enrich your experience while you're here. And you need to understand it if you're moving here. You're moving into a place that has these very delicate systems that need protection and connection. This is the corridor. Obviously, a lot of beautiful scenery. 25,000, 30,000 miles of river in Florida. So, that is a ton of corridor. I love to paddle. But what's also important to the corridor story is this: agriculture. This is citrus specifically. I'm not sure if this guy fell off the trailer or not. You're not really supposed to do that because those are like 12 feet high. I come from a citrus family, so this was like my childhood, looking at these trailers full of citrus. And these are orange groves. Now, if you've paid attention to the citrus industry in the last 15, 20 years, you notice that this is actually a rare sight these days. Really healthy trees filled with fruit and folks picking them. Why is agriculture important to the Florida wildlife story or the corridor story? Because a lot of folks that care about conservation do not see why ag is even part of this. But what were you going to say? Did you see my notes? Because that's what I was going to say. Exactly. That grove right there is a heck of a lot easier to traverse for a panther, for a bear, than concrete, than walls, than buildings. And if a drop of water falls between those trees right there and it doesn't get sucked up by the roots, it has a lot better chance of going down into the aquifer and recharging that aquifer. Of course, agriculture has its downsides, but the alternative to that is usually more concrete, more people, and less ability to make food. Ranching is a huge part of the corridor story. If you've never been on a cattle ranch in Florida, I encourage you to go, because what you might have in your mind is what it looks like or how it operates is probably a lot different if you don't have the experience. This scene is what a lot of ranches look like. It's a natural setting, beautifully well managed, with a couple cows out there. I mean, that's what ranching in Florida is like. And the wildlife, just like in the groves, have a heck of a better time traversing that and living in that than they do trying to make it through any level of development. And you might not know this, we're in Orlando right now, but one of the largest ranches in the country, and the most productive cattle ranch in the country, is what? 20 miles southeast of here, Deseret Ranch. It is the most productive cattle operation in the U.S. And how big it is, just to put this into scale, if you took all of Disney's properties, every park, as well as their preserve with the Nature Conservancy, and all the land they haven't developed, put it all together, multiply it by 10. It is bigger than that. You actually have to multiply it by 12. So that story and that property is so consequential to the movement and the survival of these big animals like bears, panthers, and small animals like the Florida grasshopper sparrow, which is the most endangered bird in North America. These ranches are the future of their home. It's also the future of our water security. So these places, groves, agriculture lands, and ranches, are all part of this thing called working lands. And what's interesting, this is what it looks like. And I've got some stories about this, but when you get away from a lot of the towns, get away from the beaches, a lot of Florida looks just like this. Right here, what we see, when you get a little further north of Orlando, this is kind of the line where you start transitioning out of cattle ranching in rural settings and groves and into pine flatwoods and timberland. So tons of land. If you've ever driven to like Tallahassee or up to Georgia, you're going to notice a ton of pine trees. It's like the pine curtain. And all that's being grown for use, food and fiber. This is either pulpwood for paper or for timber. And what's wild is that all the land that you saw in that map that still needs to turn dark green, all the land that's left to protect, 80% of it is some combination of what's called working land. Pine, cattle, agriculture. And so that's part of the story is so essential because that use, when they plant pine trees on that land, they plant them as saplings, they don't come back to that land for 30 years to harvest. They might go in once or twice to thin a little bit, but it relatively remains untouched. That is such a better use than if it got continued to be filled with more and more people. And so I'll get into this a little later, but it's very important to a connected landscape point of view and to a survival of the species point of view that working lands can remain working. And really, this is the main reason people know about the corridor, and the main reason people care is the survival of the only remaining remnant of the continental-wide mountain lion, cougar, puma, Florida panther. East of the Mississippi is the Florida panther. So this is the same species, same exact species as mountain lions out west, in LA, in Canada. The only remaining remnant is down in South Florida, and it's at a carrying capacity. They need to expand. They need to get out. Instinctually, they are trying to leave, and the corridor is going to solve that for them. I want to talk a little bit about growth. We all know Florida's growing like crazy. I've heard it my entire life. I'm from a town about an hour south of here. Orlando is like, it used to take an hour to get there. I think it's an hour and a half now. But Orlando was that, that you could see it at night on the horizon, the lights in the distance. But it was a very small town. But growth was just constant, part of the story. And in 2010, this is an old graph, but it kind of shows you the projection. 18.8 million people. 2070 is a model we look at a lot. Like, what does Florida look like in 2070? What is that, 45 years from now? We have consistently, for the last 50 years, grown at an average of 1,000 people every single day in Florida. And one of the main ways they measure that is just U-Haul one-way transactions. Like, wherever people are renting a U-Haul, driving it to and dropping it off is a really good indicator of where people are moving. And that data shows pretty consistently. Right, this year it's a little lower, things have changed. We're at like 750, 800 like the last quarter, but a net gain of a city of Orlando, every single year, consistently for 50 years. That's mind-blowing. So the threats are real. The challenge is real. And look, I love Florida. I encourage people to come here. I just encourage when you get here, kind of know the story you're getting into and be a part of the solution. So this is, I'm not sure why it's cutting off the top, but this is where we have conservation land right now. It's the green. This is not the corridor. Developed land, things that are concrete, things that are more or less taken out of the equation for the corridor. This is also 2010. And the data is showing what it's projected to 2060. So just kind of add 10% or so, 10 years to each side of this. So 2010, if we don't manage growth, here's what it looks like by 2060. So by 2070, just add a little more red, whatever percentage that is. So let me go back again. That's where the trends are headed. That's cities. That's an endless city, basically coast to coast. And so, guys, this actually is a story of hope. We'll get to that, so I hope you don't feel too discouraged. But what's cool about this, because the projection of growth is still remaining pretty consistent. We're looking at 33, 34 million people. Right now, we sit at 23 million people. Did I miss a story? Hey, y'all got to catch me on those now. That's a story star. Just say, hey, you missed your story. AJ is my great-grandfather, and I'll go back to this because now I remember. He's my great-grandfather. He was born right next to me. We lived way out in the woods in Frostproof near Avon Park, Sebring. And he was born in this little cracker house. Crackers are the cowboys that crack whips. And this little tiny cabin right next to me. And his son, my grandfather, was on this side. So we were out in the woods, and he was born in that house in the early 19-teens. And he used to talk about the change all the time. And he lived pretty late, about till 2010. So he lived about 100 years. And when he was born, there was 700,000 people in Florida. 700,000. Most roads were unpaved. This is a frontier. There wasn't a fence law. Florida was actually the last state to pass a fence law that required your livestock be inside of fences. The last state. It was a forgotten corner of the U.S. And the reason is tourists coming down from up north during the winters would just plow into a cow at 3 in the morning after being, tired driving down a dirt road. We're like, we have to do something about this. And so Florida was very, very uninhabited and rough and rugged until very recently. The biggest reason is mosquito control, is how we figured that out. It was unbearable for the frontier folks. But he would tell me, 700,000 people, and he didn't know that stat. I've looked it up since. And by the time he died, there was almost 20 million people in the state. He watched that change in one lifetime, with one set of eyes, talking about, that's year after year after year, nothing is the same. And there's always this story of there's nothing you can do, it's the forces of economics. There's really no hope. And I kind of was planted with that as well. Okay, it sucks what's happening in Florida, but we're just going to enjoy what we can and see what happens. Ride it out. Go to Georgia, somewhere else if we want that rural lifestyle. And what's really cool about this is the thing on the right, the picture on the right is what I just showed you with no management whatsoever. 33 million, 34 million people. On the left, or on the right, I might have said that backwards, the one on the left. The one on the right is the same amount of people, just managed growth with an intact corridor for the survival of bears and panthers and water and all that. And so it's totally doable to deal and manage the growth we're going to experience and still keep Florida, and keep these things we love about it and the golden egg, intact. So how did Florida become what it is for corridors? Because corridors are a relatively new concept in practice. We've all heard conserve, conserve, conserve. The last 150 years of U.S.'s history, which, the national parks are our best idea, original idea. It's been protect these places, protect Yosemite, protect Yellowstone, protect the Everglades, wherever it is, protect, this area in a city. And really this next phase, this next kind of shift in mindset is okay, it's just not enough to protect them. Because if you just surround it with people, the bears in Yellowstone, the wolves, they interbreed and become so incestuous they can't continue reproducing. And so they become fenceless zoos in a way. And so really the next shift in mindset is connection, connection, connection. But nowhere in the world is doing it except for Florida in a tangible way, in a way that's making progress and truly against the odds. So how did this happen? Got to tell Alex Casey I used Lord of the Rings in a presentation. She's going to love that. My boss might not, though. Foundation of science. So what we realized is the University of Florida, a team at the University of Florida, had been working on understanding connectivity for 40 years. Reed Noss, Larry Harris, Tom Hochter. This team had been studying, how are we going to fight all this growth that's happening? They were just doing this, and just as scientists do, they weren't really telling anybody. They were doing the work, getting the understanding, but not really, they don't have big mouths like I do to tell other people. So that was happening. The science was happening, and they were very much gaining a huge understanding of we got to make sure Florida stays, it is connected right now. And that's what I want y'all to understand. We're not making the corridor. The corridor exists right now. We're just making sure it stays that way. We're protecting it. And we can make it more traversable by building wildlife crossings and all that, but it exists right now. We just got to make sure it doesn't forever be severed. And so the science gave way to a really great story, and it took someone that saw that. And then the unlikely coalition, like the Lord of the Rings, if you ever watch Lord of the Rings, it's the most unlikely group. You got hobbits, you've got elves and wizards and dudes, and I'm not going to apply the demographics in Florida to the different characters of the Lord of the Rings fellowship, but it's your classic hero's journey. It's not who you expect to get called from home and go on this epic adventure, but so many of those elements are at play in the Florida Wildlife Corridor story, and therefore corridors all around the world. And I'm going to get into that a little bit. So let's dive into the science a little bit. This bear is alive, just rest assured. I don't want you thinking oh my gosh, I'm looking at a dead bear. The bear's alive, it's been tranquilized. That's Joe Guthrie, we call him Handsome Joe. Back in 2007, 2008, he was tracking bears, and he was tracking them on ranches just to see where are bears going. And so he put this tracker on this bear called M34, male 34. And if you don't know, Florida has bears. I run into lots of people who don't know that. We have thousands of bears, thousands of black bears. You have them probably within a few miles of here. They're everywhere, which is wonderful. but they're very elusive. They go to places you would not expect in the cover of darkness. But anyway, he put the tracker on this bear. He was doing a number of bears. But this one bear, M34, was an adventure, coming of age. It was getting old enough. He was like, I'm going to venture out on my own. I'm going to go strike out a new area. Part of that was probably because, instinctually, because he would have been killed by some competitor. So what he did over the next few months is travel from down in, it was put, I think the thing was put on him, the collar down here near Sebring. And for over the next few months, it's hard to see. I tried to find it more detailed. He went all the way, just traveled all through towns, downtowns in the middle of the night. He went right by my house when I was a kid. And I didn't know there was bears in the area at the time. So they were following this, and the little tracker on their neck is made to pop off when the battery goes low so that it doesn't get stuck there. So it popped off after a couple months. They go and pick it up, and they look at this data, and they realized, and they started zooming in and figuring out, like, this bear went on like an 800-mile journey over the course of like 6 weeks. And what stopped it, where did it stop? Not too far. What is right between Tampa and Orlando? Green Swamp, yes, that's true. But the barrier, I-4. So that bear got to I-4. It crossed every other highway, but it got to I-4, walked up and down the road for days, trying to find a way to cross. Instinctually, it knew it had to go north. It had to expand its territory. Couldn't get through. So it gave up, turned around, and headed back where it had come from, down in central Florida, the Glades County region. And when they saw that, they were like, oh my gosh, where would this bear have gone had it got through I-4? I don't blame it at all for not wanting to cross I-4. Actually, probably pretty safe to. It's basically a parking lot most days, so you just walk across. But it smartly did not cross. But this guy named Carlton Ward Jr., you might have heard of him, very well-known photographer. He met Joe out on the ranch. He was taking photos, trying to tell stories about the Florida cow hunters, the Florida cowboys, which is the original cowboys. Just aside, cows first came to America through Florida in 1521. So you're welcome, Texas. And Carlton was taking pictures of the ranchers. Joe was the bear biologist learning all this data, but he's a scientist. He's not really talking about it to many people. And they were all friends with Mallory, who was part of a big landowning family, and they were all friends. They started putting this story together, and they were like, what if we actually traverse the state of Florida on foot to prove it's connected, and then bring a bunch of attention to this idea, that layer of science that the UF team was working on but nobody knew about, called Florida Ecological Greenways Network. What if we actually showed people on camera and on foot that Florida's still connected? So back in 2012, they did the route from down in the Everglades all the way up to just west of Jacksonville. That was the first expedition, and it was supposed to come up separately. And then 2-3 years later, they did the one right there from just, I don't even know what lake that is, but they started in central Florida and went all the way to the Panhandle. Both of those routes are 1,000 miles. Both of those trips took like 3 months. They made a documentary about them all. Some of you may have seen it. It plays on like PBS pretty regularly. This was a really innovative idea because it took the science and it translated it through a story that the public could understand, and that, one, they could understand, and they could actually prove their theory is Florida still actually connected. And so they wanted to be the bear, be the panther, and physically do it. Why is storytelling important? Like, can someone just answer that? I kind of might have answered that, but like, why is it important to physically do this route? To make it relatable. Trekking through the Everglades for 3 weeks. Very relatable. Right? Feels like life. It's engaging, yes, absolutely. It is relatable. You can physically understand it. You can realize, oh, when I'm just driving down I-4 and I just like see woods, that's more than just greenery. That's actually a pathway animals are using, that's plants are using, water's using to thrive and to make sure that it can continue. And so the 2012 expedition, like I said, 1,000 miles, sounded the alarm. They made this really popular documentary. They biked, they paddled, they hiked. They did literally a media interview or some sort of interview every single day of that 100 days, which is crazy. That was harder probably than doing it. And so it kind of started this trend of doing storytelling every couple years. And so as we kept going as an organization, the organization happened right around 2018 or so. I'm sorry, a little bit sooner than that. But it changed some names. This idea called the Florida Wildlife Corridor was still not really named until somewhere in the middle there. And the expeditions did get shorter because it's hard to commit to 100 days away from families and all that. So they started focusing on the areas that needed the most attention. And these stories, this film is really what's planted the idea of the corridor in the public's mind. So our most recent film is called Patchwork Wild, and it's a story about Southwest Florida, and it's really a panther story. And what's cool, out of all the expeditions we've ever done, we actually saw a panther with our own eyes on this expedition. You know what the coolest thing is about it, too? It was coming out of a tomato farm and going in to the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge. And it was on the property owned by the tomatoes, but it had to come through some tomato fields to get to that point. And there was, in the background, there was like a tractor driving down the dirt road and the panthers in the foreground. It was incredible. And so these storytelling efforts have been instrumental in getting the word out there. That's not all we do as an organization. That's just one thing we do. So we really have to ask ourselves, you know, the Florida that we're going to leave for our families and our friends and the next generations is really going to be up to us. This conservation story in Florida is reaching the final chapters of the story. It's been going on for 150 years, but so much has been done. We're getting very close to like a place, it might be in our lifetime, in our kids' lifetimes or grandkids' lifetimes, where every acre of Florida has been decided for. Has it been developed? Which you don't really come back from that. Like there's very rare cases that, you know, a development gets built, golf course can be built and rewilded, but it's very rare for it to be turned to concrete and then to go back. The economics just are not in favor of all that. It's hard enough to turn a cow pasture into a forest, which does happen, and that's the most likely, or an orange grove. It's still extremely expensive. So there will be a time where every acre has been decided for, whether it's this way or that way. Right now, it's more or less a third, a third, a third. The good news in Florida, a third of it's protected. 31% of the state is under conservation, which is awesome. About a third is developed, just under. There's about a third on the table that we're going to be, you know, I'm going to say fighting for, but you know, it's going to be what we're going to be trying to protect. So let's go back to that data. So this is, I believe that's I-4. This is the bear data of its pinging locations back in 2008 when they put the collar on. And let's fast forward just a little bit. Here's 2020. So these places, obviously, this is not news to anybody. You see excavators everywhere you turn. It's not news to anybody, but it's pretty wild to see a place a bear was using. I'm sorry, that's not I-4, of course, because it didn't cross. So it was making its way up to I-4. Some of y'all might recognize where this is. Yeah, it might be the turnpike. Yeah, I do see the toll booths. And then that. And it's also just crazy. You can just move a pond, you know, like, hey, we'll move the pond over here. I don't think that way. But obviously, a bear's not going to be traversing through there. At least it will not prefer that route now. So it will adjust to where is still wild, where is still green, where is still covered. So, you know, all of us live in houses. All of us are using development every day. We're sitting in development right now. Like we drove on a road to get here. We all live in a home. So what do we do? And is there hope for the story? And I want to just spend the rest of this conversation talking about the progress that's being made and talking about how you are a part of this story, and that yes, the odds are stacked against this kind of vision, but the stakes are so high that it takes a tremendous amount of stakeholders to make it happen. A really beautiful story. You're going to have a lot of homework after this, by the way. Like, and what's fun about it's watching films, so it's not too bad. This film right here was made by the F-Stop Foundation out of South Florida. Awesome group. If you're driving I-4 now, one of the coolest things that has happened in recent years, this is like year and a half, 2 years ago, they built a wildlife crossing under I-4 between basically Lakeland and Highway 27 called the Hilochi Wildlife Management Area. And that was a huge deal because it was the first really big crossing, which is an underpass right there. It's called a box culvert. And they're relatively inexpensive to build, and there's tons in the works. But once land is protected on either side of the road, you can always build a wildlife crossing. Like, that can always come later. You can't do that, though, if the other side of the road looks like that. You can't do that if the road looks like that. It has to be protected first. What's cool about this story is when they finished that crossing, they noticed that deer started using it. They have cameras in there. It was the first time in 50 years they could actually measure like genetic transfer of the deer population on either side of I-4. So for the past 50 years, the deer on either side of I-4 have not dared to cross I-4. A lot of times there is fencing too to prevent them from doing that. But they've literally never interacted until 2 years ago. So for thousands and thousands and thousands of years they have. And then all of a sudden they can't. And then now there's solutions to it. So this film is really inspiring. It's obviously very applicable to folks in Orlando. I encourage you to watch it. It's free on YouTube. And what's really neat, just down the road from here, they're actually building another crossing. And it's the state's first overpass. It's going to go over I-4. And it's just outside of Lakeland. It's right around some industrial parks, but you don't need a ton of space a lot of the time for wildlife to make the physical connection and for it to be functionally connected. So as you see, this isn't a very wide path. It's literally like an on-ramp. It's going over I-4, and it's actually cheaper to do it that way because you don't have to stop traffic. You can build everything up to the point you got to put beams across, and then you can do that at night. And so it's a much more economical way, and more animals will use it because they don't have to go under something in the dark, and it kind of mutes the sound. But there's so many cool things happening around that have showed not only conservation groups and garden clubs and everybody else have bought into this story, but also state agencies like FDOT. And once you start tapping into that, we can get a lot of things done. And so, yeah, next time you drive to Tampa, if you dare, go down I-4 to the other side of the state, look for that around exit 38. I don't think there's an exit 39, but right in between there, you'll see the wildlife crossing underneath. You'll see the directional fencing along the side, and you'll see the overpass getting ready to go. And what's cool is there will be a sign like that next to it. So this is getting implemented by FDOT all over the state, and I jumped ahead just a little bit because it's applicable to this. There will be a corridor sign. That was not designed by us, that was the state, but they're putting this up in hundreds of locations already. So if you go to a state park that's in the corridor, which I think 75 out of 176 state parks are in the corridor, you'll start seeing this. Like, hey, you are in the corridor, and the corridor needs protection. And we're doing, we got to continue making progress and keeping this front of mind for folks. And I'll tell you a little bit more why. So we're not going to get political. The Florida Wildlife Corridor Act was a monumental moment because it happened kind of unexpectedly, and it happened quicker than anyone thought. It was a bill passed during the legislative session in 2021. That's our founder at the bottom, Carlton Ward Jr., who is a dedicated filmmaker now through Wild Path. This passed unanimously in Florida legislature, which does not happen for extremely newsworthy topics. Like, there's always somebody trying to make a name for themselves by, a no vote, or there's a little more of a split, even though there's a ton of support. This passed unanimously. It was a huge deal. And what it did was that the state now recognizes the corridor as an actual geography. Like, this is just like a national park, just like a state park. This is a place. This is a place on the map. It's a lot harder to identify because it's a mixture of all kinds of other lands, but it's a place, and we're going to prioritize it, and we're going to help fund and make it happen. That was a huge deal. I don't remember the question I was going to ask you. It doesn't have a ton of teeth as far as, like, there's no requirement, but they've adopted it in their planning and adopted it in the identification, which is step one. And since then, billions of dollars have been funded to protect it. So let's look at some progress this year. We all hear, and I'm sure, I don't know if y'all are on social media and get poisoned with negativity constantly like I do, but there's a ton of people that are just like, fight everything. There's anywhere you turn in Florida is construction, forests getting turned down, gopher tortoises getting covered up with concrete. It's devastating. It seems like devastation everywhere. But I want to give you some facts, because a lot of times, if you feel this way, you're in your car alone. You're driving alone. It feels very helpless. You feel very like, what can I do about this? But the cool news is, last year, Florida protected 162,000 acres of its land. And since the signing of that act, nearly 500,000 acres have been protected in the corridor, adjacent to the corridor. And when you look at, well, like people are like, well, how many acres got developed? Through roads, through irreversible land use changes. And there's not an easily identifiable stat for that, and so I don't want to just throw numbers out there, but a consensus is right around 70, 80,000. And so that's a remarkable story, and that's a remarkable thing to be proud of, that Florida, don't quote me on this, please, to my boss. Other people you can. It's very likely that Florida protected twice as many acres as it developed last year. And that's an amazing thing we should be proud of, an amazing thing we should be very, give us hope for moving forward with this story, because as you can see, like, we're not closing the door to Florida. More people are gonna come, and we want them to. We just want them to know, hey, you're entering into this story that has huge implications for the future, because the idea of corridors is catching on, and I'm gonna talk about that in just a little bit. So yeah, I told you, there will be signs. So our next expedition, I'm going to talk about this because it just happened like a couple weeks ago. We had the idea, our first 7 expeditions were, all about Carlton, Mallory, and Joe, and they went on the first like 3 or 4. Then we started doing like community folks and areas, teachers and kids and veterans. And this idea for this next one, we were like, hey, it's the 5-year anniversary of the Corridor Act. Let's kind of go knock on Tallahassee's door to remind them that this is a priority and this is what people want. We had this crazy idea. We'll see if it was a good one. It's like, instead of, inviting, locals, let's invite actually commissioners from different parts of Florida to go see the places that they're actually making decisions on and help someone like Sean down in Lake County or Becky in Polk County realize that the implications that they make for a land use change, approving a master plan community that severs this, really important corridor, is not just consequential for their corridor in their county. It's the statewide vision, but it's also a vision that's slowly gaining traction regionally, nationally, even globally. You don't want to be the person that cuts it off, because we will write a press release about that. And it's not going to be good for your campaign. But we wanted them to understand the decisions matter bigger than where you're thinking and where your district is right now. And another thing we did was we started this expedition in Thomasville, Georgia, because Georgia's very interested. How do we do this? Because Florida's doing it with all the different kinds of people. The unlikely coalition. There's beach people. There's cattle ranchers. There's people that really don't go out at all. There's tourism. There's a lot of different kinds of stakeholders in Florida. It's very varied. So how are y'all coming to a consensus of this? So a lot of people are looking this way saying, how are they doing it? Because we got to take those lessons and apply it to us. And we took them on this route, which was hell. It was no water. There was fire bans everywhere. They did incredible. The film is going to come out in the fall, the documentary film about this. It was very difficult. It was a lot of hiking through mud and going through really rugged terrain. I mean, it wasn't the Rocky Mountains, but you know what I'm saying. It was the Red Hills. And we had a couple of our expedition coordinators and logistic folks here, Tim and Maria. They helped keep these 4 people sane. And they're all, I'm not going to go into their political backgrounds, but they're all varied. We have very progressive. We have very conservative together. And the unity, the agreement, the bonding, the friendship was palpable. And it's like, people need to realize how unified Floridians are around protecting what we have. Protecting the lifestyle, protecting the place. We all love Florida. And so be watching out and following along, because this film is going to be very, very interesting. Another thing we do, obviously a connected, and I'm almost done, a connected story like Florida, there's very critical gaps. We call them irreplaceable gaps. When you add them all up, there's like 16 of them. They are about 900,000 acres. So that's where we're focusing on. This one right here is called the Last Green Thread. That's all through Disney's property right there. And some of these are very close to being severed. Some of them are already protected. So these are really where the battles are, and really where we need to make sure decision makers have the most up-to-date information, because nobody, I promise you, no matter how bought out you are. Nobody wants to be on that side of the press release like so-and-so made the decision to sever the corridor. And so if they have the information they need and know that they can be the ones to protect that area, they almost certainly will and have proved that over time. It's just getting the information out. So how can you get involved? I think I might have missed a story or two. So I usually hate this part of a presentation because I never feel like a lot of thoughts put into it, or like a lot of, this person or this org is doing this really cool stuff. I want to help. There's really no answer. Sometimes you can't. If you're their architects and they're building, wildlife crossings, you don't want a bunch of volunteers out there trying to do that. But what can you do? And these are things we put together, 10 things that we've built that actually help, actually continue the effort. And half of them are really fun, like donating. That's really fun. Watching films, going out, like the stats that you show when local communities and organizations see oh, this place is loved. Like on the route, I'll go back to the route, there was a couple places that are high use, high recreation places like Wakulla Springs. And, we were told hey, historically a lot of our routes have been very wild. It's been very out there, very rugged. We thought, it's actually important for them to see how much people love some of these places. One, so they can understand if they're being overused, but also to know your community and your voters love this spring, love this river, love this area. You need to know that that's a value that they have, even if you've never been there. But now that you've been there and you know about it, you love it too. And so using the places, visiting gardens, visiting places within the corridor, which there's tons of resources to know where is the corridor, so that you can go visit, that adds data to the decisions. And it's so important. It's also the funnest thing to do. And that's what I like to do, is take friends out to the corridor. And it doesn't mean, a 5-day slog through the woods. It's going birding. It's going fishing. It's paddling around. It's just spending money in those communities for those reasons. And one of the stories I want to tell you, supporting working lands, I told you earlier that cattle ranches and groves are really the future of the corridor. I recently interviewed on a podcast, which I will be telling you about, one of the lead researchers for the Florida grasshopper sparrow. There's this awesome documentary out. It's done by National Geographic called The Little Brown Bird. And it's award-winning. It came out in the fall. You should watch it. It's on YouTube. It's free. And it's a story about, like I said, the most endangered bird in North America, the grasshopper sparrow. And it's just south of here. The only range in the world it lives is an hour south of here. DeLuca Preserve, Three Lakes Wildlife Management Area. And the lead researcher, Mary Marine, who lives in Orlando, she gets up at 3 in the morning every day. This morning, I talked to her this morning, drives to the preserve and counts the birds. She has a shirt with the birds on there, with artistic paintings of the grasshopper sparrow. There's more grasshopper sparrows on that shirt than there are in the wild. And I said, she's just such a hopeful, kind, wonderful, happy person. She's also a wedding photographer and planner on the side. And I asked her, I was like, Mary, what can the average person do to support the Florida grasshopper sparrow? You obviously don't want people coming out and handling these birds. There's dozens of them left in the wild. She goes, the number one thing you can do, the number one action you can take to support the survival of this most endangered bird in Florida is buy Florida beef. And I was like, I didn't expect that answer. And she's vegan too, so that kind of complicates, her answer. But the reason she said that, she goes, the ranches that surround these conservation areas are prime habitat for this ground nesting bird. And we can easily protect them from being trampled by putting up these fencings and whatnot. But she goes, the future of the survival of this species, which it needs more land to continue thriving, is going to be on cattle ranches. And I said, well, what do the ranchers think when they hear that, their land is so consequential? They are thrilled. You will find that these multi-generational landowners love the land, and the more they learn about how important it is to stories like this, because they've probably seen thousands of grasshopper sparrows over the years. It's just a tiny little brown bird. They've probably not thought nothing of it. But when they realize how consequential the physical land that they've stewarded for generations is for these species. I mean, they just, the love enriches, the desire to protect it enriches. She's like, that's the number one thing you can do. Because what these landowners think is their future when they need to do something, when the economics do not work in their favor to continue operating, they think their only option is to sell to development. And if you think the pressure isn't real, I recently talked to a landowner who owns about 5,000 acres in Manatee County, and I'm almost done, I promise. I said, Jim, do you get a lot of, and it's far enough out of town you wouldn't think he's got a lot of pressure, but I said, do you get a lot of pressure for developing this, turning this 5,000 acres into a big community? He's like, come here, let me show you. So we walk into his office, and he reaches down in his desk and pulls out a drawer, and it was just breeding business cards. All different business cards from folks that knock on his door, folks that send him stuff in the mail, folks that he sees in town and knows who he is and says, when you're ready, I'm going to make you an offer. He had hundreds of developers that reach out over the past few years and dozens per week wanting to buy the land and rid him of the responsibility, him and his family, the responsibility of managing a very volatile beef market. Say, hey, in 90 days, I could get you millions of dollars. You'll never have to think about this again. And that's very appealing when you've seen your family struggle for generation after generation after generation, trying to just eke out a living. It's very appealing to say, I'm going to wash my hands of this, walk away, and not have to worry about this anymore, or my grandkids, or my great-grandkids. That's how big some of these ranches are. And so it was so neat to me that her, as a researcher, Mary, and as a vegan, was like, that's the number one thing you can do, is make sure when you are buying steaks for a party or whatever, make sure they're from Florida, because the more you can keep that rancher in business, the more you can keep the timber farmers in business, the more likelihood they are not to feel desperate and backed into a corner to say, this is my only option, because these are the only ones making me offers. So that's something we can do right now. If you eat meat, or if you're not a beef eater, there's plenty of Florida products. Fresh from Florida is an indicator that you can see in the market and just say, hey, this is a Florida product. I can make sure, because 80% of the land left to protect in the corridor is working lands. So, another way to stay in touch is a podcast. I love podcasts because I'm always on the go. I'm always driving. I'm always looking for people converting news to audio format so I can listen. So we have a podcast that we host interviewing folks like Clyde Butcher. You might be familiar with him. Ranchers, scientists, people that just like to yap like me. And I encourage you to listen. And also I want to finish. I think I'm finishing. Yeah, I'm going to finish with this. Just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, National Geographic, and this is just a screenshot from a website, nothing else. National Geographic launched this vision, this idea. And I'm not exactly sure how they're going to, address it fully, but it's called Connected Planet. And it's the idea that, hey, corridors are actually our best model to fight everything from climate change to the survival of migratory animals like elk and bison and elephants all over the world. This is a really good idea. And we need to have more corridors. We need to have more people working on corridors. They're using this entire vision. They're launching this entire vision based on the template of Florida. So the world is watching this thing. We're basically the lab mice right now. Like, people are looking at Florida saying, how the hell are they figuring that out? Have you seen people from Florida? And how are they doing this? And so that's not to say, hey, look at us. It's like, you're a part of this. Like, you are a part of, and you live within a few miles of really the most ambitious conservation vision in the world. And your advocacy for getting people out to just see nature is helping to address the world's biggest problems. And whether or not Florida achieves this vision, and we're going to make damn sure we do, but if we didn't, it will serve as a cautionary tale for the other places to learn. So I just want to plant in you, like, you are all part of this as people that showed up here today. This has been going on, but we're still at the beginning of this idea. Still, we have a long way to go. The last 8 million acres is going to be really, the harder 8 versus the first 10. But also, all these other states are already looking at Florida saying, like, okay, if y'all are doing it, we want to do it. North Carolina already has one. Texas is looking at one. Georgia is looking at one. And then we're talking about regionally. There could be a time in our life that a panther from South Florida could make its way to the Appalachian Mountains, where I'm from, where my family's from, make its way up the East Coast. They want to go. Like M34 wanted to go. Who knows where M34 would have gone? And we actually don't know where M34 is now. I'm sure he's happy, just enjoying life. But who knows where M34 would have gone had the connection been made? We can build more, we can build more crossings over time, but we got to get the land now. So right now is the story of getting the land. So I just wanted to plant that in y'all. Y'all are a part of this. It's a really big vision when you start zooming out and start seeing who's paying attention. National Geographic is a force of nature, literally. And if they're thinking about this and they're using, this is just their website. If you scroll down, they're just basically saying the Florida Wildlife Corridor is how this is going to happen. So I encourage y'all to get involved, to start showing up, to come to events, to tell people about it. That's the number one thing you can do is tell others about it. Get them out there to show them. So thank you so much.